There you go, Lorna.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary Jean, for reading that bio out in such an honorable way. And it's actually interesting to hear it reflected back to me. And so thank you for that. And thank you, Tina, and you and Mary Jean for your creation of Awakening Spirituality and Seeker Circle. What an amazing opportunity, resource, venue for people to come together on all kinds of discussions for that. And Anna, to you, thank you so much for your invitation to me to be a part of this. So I'm going to, I want to, there's lots that I want to share, and yet I want to create the space within my sharing for you to also integrate what's happening. And then at our discussion time afterwards, I welcome questions and discussions because, yeah, this spiritual journey is, it's unique to each of us, and yet common to each of us in many ways and on different levels. I'm going to start with a bit of a story. Back about 22 years ago now, I was teaching in the school system and started my school year and got laryngitis 2 weeks later. And so I was off till my voice came back, and a couple of weeks later I was off again. So that went on for about 4 weeks, or pardon me, 4 months, off and on and off and on. And it ended up that I ended up staying off of school teaching because my voice just wasn't there. What I've come to look at later in hindsight was that was my time where my spiritual journey really began in earnest. I had grown up in a church, beautiful, loving church home and community, really blessed and grateful for that. And yet I've come to realize there's a difference between a religious experience and a spiritual experience and a journey. So I actually eventually left the church because for me, it was, I needed to have a spiritual journey that took me on a different road. And in my time off my school, it was trying to find out what was going on with the body and all kinds of different inner experiences I did, like journaling and reading different things with that, lots of doctor's appointments, holistic things, the whole bit that way to find out. And it was, I had gone to a health fair. And as I was walking into the parking lot, there was somebody that I met that I didn't know who they were. And we sparked a conversation. And in there, she said, we're actually spiritual beings having a human experience, not humans having a spiritual experience. And I kind of like, what? Because that had been my whole journey of, being in the church and growing up that way. It was, here I am, this human trying to connect to God, and have this spiritual experience. And somehow I forget it just right. I'm going to be able to make that connection. And that for me, it was just a real jarring to my body. But that was what really started me to, what? Is there something to that? And so that's where I really began my own spiritual journey. And the physical was just that way that allowed me to go into that. So here's this spiritual journey going on along the way. I also had sometime later, it began my journey of a sexual journey. I had grown up again with this idea and this teaching that save yourself for marriage. And I did not realize until, I'm going to say even 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, how deeply that impacted me. Number one, it gave me the belief, the idea that, number one, my body, my sexuality was not mine, that it was indeed for the man and for the marriage. So I didn't even explore my body. It's just kind of, okay, like a good girl, I saved myself for marriage at 18. I was a virgin, got married, and went on to have 2 beautiful children with this beautiful man that I was married to, but I didn't know about my own body. I didn't know about my own sexuality. My husband at the time, my former husband, said, why don't you start to find out what makes you feel good so you can tell me? I didn't know. And I jokingly say is I'm a really good learner, but it only took me 20 years to start exploring that journey. So here this journey starts to happen, raising my children, and still at the same time knowing there was something sexually that I just wasn't able to access. How do I get to that? My body's feeling certain things, but I just can't access, and I didn't know how. And so I just kind of put that a little bit on the back burner, so to speak, because I had children to raise while they were in school. That's when I went and got my teaching degree and started to teach, and just this amazing experience that way. And again, going forward, 8 years or so of my teaching is when that happened with my laryngitis, my body shutting down and saying, there's something that's got to change. And so during that time, not only was I exploring myself and my belief systems, having these amazing spiritual experiences, but it also led me on this journey that started me on my sexual journey as well, of really starting to find out what's here for me, who am I as a sexual being, and how do I access this energy that I just feel that is there. As it turned out, I began to take some courses, to attend some retreats, took a professional training that I started to, actually, I'm going to back up a little bit further. I was teaching, as Mary Jean shared with you, I was facilitating a wellness and energy wellness course. And at the time I was facilitating internationally. And this time I was in Victoria, BC. And one of the women from the States came up for the course. We ended up being roommates. And she had her doctorate in human sexuality. She began to talk with me, and I shared with her that I had never explored my own sexuality. I didn't know what made me feel good. I didn't know how to connect to my own body, my own sexuality. So as it turned out, I hired her as a coach to help me with my own explorations, my own sexuality, to be able to connect to my own body, to my own sexuality. And that was pivotal, to be able to find out, wow, this is what my body is able to experience. And from there, it led me on a journey of my sexual explorations, learning courses, and being a teacher by nature and by training. Once I had taken this training and supporting other people in connecting to their bodies and their sexuality, it just became a natural thing for me to then teach this. And so I became a teacher of an international program, sexological body work. And so I had my practice of that. It's now been over close to 12 years now that I've been working as a somatic sex educator, supporting people in connecting to their own bodies. And I use consent as a foundation for what I do, because a lot of times our body is not, for many reasons, we don't feel like our body is our own. And so how to connect to that and into the sexuality piece. And so I continued with that. And interestingly, this whole thing about the divine feminine, it really didn't start to come out until, I'm going to say, probably in this last several years, where I start to realize that how much our what we can look at as religious, but it becomes more than that, because our religion spills out into our culture and our societies. And we have this idea of the patriarchy. We have the idea of man, just as I had said, this whole idea that my body, my sexuality is for the man. We have this idea that the male is the ultimate. And in religion, there's this idea that, well, we have this male God, that therefore that's where the ultimate authority comes from. And somehow I think that within myself, which is probably very similar to a lot of women, a lot of you hear perhaps this idea that somehow this just doesn't feel right. But when we're taught that, it's kind of, we go along with that until somehow something happens. Well, eventually, as I continued to teach in the sexuality piece, I realized that the spirituality piece was a key piece of the journey. And as I've shared it, sometimes, like, I was teaching the sexuality piece and awakening to this divine feminine piece. And over the years, it's like then they started to really twine together and to realize that they're really not separate from one another at all. My former husband, at one point, and I would say that I call myself a visionary, a free spirit, a pioneer. My husband at the time was he's very pragmatic, and he continues to be very, structured. And he said to me at one point, probably about 10 years into our marriage, that he said, "You're like the fire and I'm like the rocks around it." And I remember just feeling I resisted that. I just really reacted to it because I felt that that was a way of him trying to control my perspective of males, trying to control. And that was his way of trying to let me not be who I was. I want to be this free spirit. I want to be able to come and go. Beautifully, as I have come to see and understand that about the divine feminine, it is also with that understanding of the divine masculine. That the divine masculine, and I'm going to bring in, from my Tantra perspective of some training, we hear of yin and yang, and we often think of the feminine as yin and the masculine as yang. And yet the feminine has a yin and a yang. The masculine has a yin and a yang. So what that looks like is, for the feminine, in that that yin is that flow, just going within with things, that receptiveness, that energetic heart connection. The yang of the feminine is that which expels and says, "We're done." And so birthing that is a part of it, right? We expel, we push out. And it can be also that which Kali is, that destroyer, is, right? This is done. This is done. Time to create something new. So that whole creative part of stuff. So the yin and the yang of the feminine are both there, and they exist within all of us. The yin of the yang of the masculine is the structure. The yin of the masculine is that which holds the testicles. It holds and supports. And so when we can allow for the yin and the yang of the masculine, and we see how those work together, that in the sexuality, there can be that flow back and forth, and it's actually a beautiful way to look at consent, where we see where that flow of energy and touch and giving and taking goes. That also, when we look at it from the energetic aspect of things, we see that just like I had thought that from this idea, and I'm going to bring up the word again, patriarchy, because there's a lot of energy around that. And I'm going to say that the patriarchy is not men. Patriarchy is an approach, a perspective. It's a way of doing things. It's when one way of doing things overrules, and in that competitive trying to take control, it overrules. And so the competitive has to be where something wins and loses, as opposed to a matriarchal where there's collaboration, where there's a win-win for everyone. And masculine, females and males, and all genders in between, everyone has, what I will say, has suffered from, been impacted by the patriarchy. It's a system that we look at and we say, now, this doesn't work. It's time to do something else. So now, to bring back, rather than the uncontrolled masculine being in control, it's now bringing the feminine back into control, into a place of collaboration and what I call the divine feminine power, sexuality, and leadership. That the feminine is what creates that natural flow. And from there, the masculine comes in and supports. So a lot of times, so again, drawing back on my experience of what it was like with my former husband commenting about the rocks and the fire, is if we can look now at this analogy of how that looks, that the fire burns, and how does it burn? With its strongest energy and its most ability to create energy and to create light and to produce. It's when those rocks are around it to create that structure to hold it. And rather than suppressing it or putting it out, it actually allows it to come into its fullest form. And so too does the, if we look at the, a drop of water, that one drop at a time seems like it's not making much of a difference, but over time, it creates a little indent into a rock, into the solidness of that rock. And then little by little, as that continues to happen, and the drop changes into more of a flow, and pretty soon we've got a little channel that's happening in the soil, and pretty soon a creek and a river that's flowing. And the power of that water is contained by the riverbanks and allowing the full force of that creative energy to be channeled and used in its fullest force. So when we think about the spiritual part of things, we can also look at, so there's looking at things energetically, the feminine and the masculine, the divine feminine, when that is in its power. Now, I'd spoken in my introduction about, or my topic, what I want to share about is, number one, how it's hidden and why it's hidden. And when there's something that is shamed, hidden, disguised, deflected, all of those things, it's one of the ways that we know there's one of the greatest sources of power and value. What do people do when they have something, money, treasures, things? We put them under lock and key, we hide them, we disguise them. And so that's one of the ways that we can know that the divine feminine is a source of great truth, power, value, and it benefits everyone. And so by recognizing this, we reframe what's been happening and saying, it's actually not shameful, it's not bad, it's not wrong. And the patriarchy has been a great disguise for that. And so as the divine feminine is arising, our awareness is arising, we're now bringing that full creative force back into play and allowing, and it's because it's in collaboration, as women are empowered to be in their power, to embrace their sexuality beyond the procreation, but for the pure power of the pleasure of being, inhabiting and embodied in these bodies, in their sexual power, that they are then able to step into, own their voices, own their bodies, own their ability to speak, and to speak from their souls, from their hearts. And what that does, it so beautifully, just like that water dripping and flowing, it allows the masculine then to come into place and be in their place of service and of support. Over and over and over the years, as men have come to me for sessions, whatever they come to as their symptom, what their greatest cry is and their plea is, please help me to be the best that I can be for my wife, for my partner, for my girlfriend. And the women are coming, I want to connect to my body, I want to connect to my sexuality. And so as I support each one, it allows everyone to be empowered in their own way, in their own sexuality, in service to one another and into harmony. Because when the divine feminine is in place, that that the men are now in that place, and the women are leading, the feminine is leading, the masculine now has a place, because the patriarchy comes because the feminine isn't there to say, this is where you need to be doing, this is what I need of you. I need you to do this, I need this. And the masculine says, I will be there in service. How can I support you? And as that's happening, then the masculine and the feminine are in their place of service, which then automatically leads to harmony, which then our children get to grow up in homes of harmony. And so this whole acceptance of the feminine as an incredible place of power, an incredible source of power, their sexuality, a woman who is in her body, in her sexuality, it's not necessarily that there's this all rampant, all, running around and that type of thing. However, each woman chooses to express, she is there and in her place of leadership from that. The masculine say, now I know where I can bring my greatest gifts now and in service. So when we look at it from a divine perspective, is the divine is the feminine, that creative, that flow. We in human experience are the vessels that support that experience of the spirit. So as we sink into as we come into and embrace this sexual experience, this human experience, we're acknowledging the spirituality that is flowing, the sexuality that is flowing, and the harmony that can happen when we allow that feminine leadership to be in place, the divine feminine. And it's like puzzle pieces that start to fit together. And it's this harmonious place that can happen. And it's actually interesting. Several years ago, there was one of the men in my world who has been in a domination submission experience extended, where that place of just releasing and just having the woman saying, this is what I want you to do, this is what I need you to do. He was able to sink into this place of letting go of control and just being in service to the feminine. And it's like that same thing as we in human form recognize the spirit that is flowing through us and as us. We are bringing into that harmony what we recognize in the spiritual feminine, divine feminine leading in harmony and leading the masculine. That it helps us, creates that harmony or that harmonious and parallel experience of the spirit and the human experience together. So why I share exciting times? Because all around us globally, we're hearing about the divine feminine arising again. What an exciting time, because here we are where we are as women being able to allow this divine feminine to really truly own our voices, our bodies, our sexuality, our power, our leadership, and creating that flow within the which with the masculine says, thank you, I've been looking for the place to serve. And we all get to work together in collaboration for, this world of inner world and outer world of harmony and peace and aliveness. So the divine feminine, stepping in, and it's arising in an exciting time for all of us. And I feel like that's just a place that I just want to create this space and sort of to end my sharing time with that. Thank you for this opportunity to share, and